5 cards from Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth that you should have in your collection, and a 6th mystery card that will get better over time.
Next on Eternal Durdles.
Stop, I need more stuff. Can't see, I need more stuff. But now I go. I'm keeping up with the Joneses.
Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Bleckman. Phil, how's it going, man?
It's going well with you as always.
Yes. It's good to
Today
be
we're
back.
going to be talking about Tales of Middle-earth, the cards that have seen competitive legacy success thus far.
Yes.
How long since this set has been out? Like, it's only been a couple weeks, right?
Today is, we're recording early Monday, so it has been almost 2 weeks.
So 2 weeks, there's been many an event online, a couple of paper events as well, that has shown that this set is a hit. It is a legacy hit on multiple cards, not just, one marquee card. We sort of saw this coming, but now we're seeing the fruits of that success starting to bloom, and we're going to get into them.
Yeah, I think honorable mention, we should say that we're just not going to be talking about Orcish Bowmasters this episode.
We just don't need to. Yeah, we don't need to.
Yeah, we already know.
We already know. I mean, the thing, too, is that it's not just that. I mean, obviously, everybody knew Bowmasters from the moment that it was spoiled. Everybody knew that it was going to be a playable card in Legacy, and it was going to change things. And I think that the space on like where its best home is still finding its way. It's been in Grixis Delver shells. It's brought Death Shadow, like just straight blue-black Death Shadow, into the forefront of like top lists as well.
You've seen black splashes in decks that weren't playing black before?
Yeah, it's sort of the first fair black card, like the first main deckable fair black card that we've seen. Since I can't even remember when. Like Dark Ritual, like ever since Uro got printed, black was sort of pushed into only being Dark Ritual combo decks if you wanted to play black competitively. And then the only real time you saw like sort of fair-ish style stuff was like when people would play like Dauthi Voidwalker or Opposition Agent or whatever. But usually that would be like paired in some sort of combo deck that had a combo finish, not just like I'm trying to fair cards get you. And so black has been relegated to a combo color since Uro's printing back, in 2019 or something?
Yeah, if you weren't playing Death Shadow, you were playing a combo when you're playing black, right?
Yeah, and I feel like Death Shadow was also sort of anemic by comparison to Delver decks for a very long time. Granted, like we just went through a couple of bannings, and so Death Shadow has like come back in the forefront. But both Death Shadow and Grixis Delver have adopted Orcish Bowmasters into their 75, but both have seen success so far. So it's fun to see that black is sort of getting back into the mix as a color that's not just Dark Ritual Plus.
Yeah. Well, I think the first card we should talk about is the card that you were the biggest champion of to begin with. In fact, you even got a shout out on Eternal Glory last week. Council's Deliberation.
Council's Deliberation showed up. Peter Vanderham, he split was it a showcase? Was it a legacy challenge? I think it was a challenge. Yeah. He split a challenge with 3 copies of Council's Deliberation and 4 Preordain in his Grixis Delver list. And it is more or less exactly what you think it is, except he swapped Ponder for Preordain and played some Council's Deliberation. And the extra card advantage, plus all the incidental value of like surveilling it and whatnot, took him to the first challenge finals after the release of the set. And that's like a baseline, right? It's like the baseline thing that you compare it with. I've been testing Council's Deliberation, and I've also enjoyed it very much. And I've only really used it with Preordain. There's probably a lot more exploration to be had in terms of dumping that card to the yard without casting the front half. But the incidental ability to go up cards in, blue soupish style stuff is probably a little bit underexplored. Right now, I don't think there's more to talk about that than Council's Deliberation. It's hitting exactly like we thought it would hit. And now it's just a matter of like how much of that will stay in that it's sort of packaged with Preordain until we get more legacy playable scry cards. Yeah. Unless there's a legacy scry card that like we just haven't explored at all, that's been off the radar, that nobody has really taken under. But I think that there's a world where the blue soup sort of decks could adopt that card in the future, but not as long as the One Ring is around. And the One Ring has really been the thing that's I feel like for the controlled decks has been the marquee addition. And there's actually been a couple for control decks, but in particular, the One Ring has been showing up with the Lighted Halfling and such. Should we get into that?
Well, before we go too far into that, I just want to say, Chris Panucci, 90s MTG, did a great job of showcasing you playing it in his last roundup, where I think you might have played 3 out of the 4 matches in that roundup. So you got a really good chance to see how well Council's Deliberation did for you and how much respect it got. I remember I think Roland surgical extracted it as you were casting Preordained, so you didn't draw like 4 more cards off of it. You know, so
yeah, there was I believe
we'll have
it was,
the link for that below too.
Yeah, a couple links. There were 3 rounds that I was on camera that night that I played with Council's Deliberation. 2 of them I feel like I played really tight. One of the rounds when I played against Red Painter, or Red Black Painter, was Flashing Orcus Bowmasters. That was a little bit later in the night, and I watched that video back and realized that I just wasn't playing around with anything. It was super sloppy. I was just like sort of turned off in that one. Like I didn't play nearly as tightly as I could. But the other 2 matches are good showcases for like
masterclass. Really honestly, like watching them back is.
Tight play and showing the power level of Council's Deliberation, being able to grind. There was one instance where Preordained was just Ancestral Recall against my Blue Painter opponent. It does show up. Like there are times where you're like, okay, it just cycled and that was it, and you know the game you don't get to the position. But I really only had Preordained and Snapcaster for Preordained as my additional scries, and just the leveling up of those cards as the game went long was pretty impactful. And you can see that Benucci was commentating on those matches and seeing it in play for the first time and being like, that was an Ancestral. That's pretty good. So is it going to be format overhauling? No. But is it a great addition to that space of card advantage? 100%. And I already have, I have alters in the mail, you know, like
that's how you know it's real.
I'm committed to, well, the thing is, I'm committed to that card being essentially like the new, better version of AK.
Yeah.
But in a way where they're only ever going to print more good scry cards, right? Like right now, it's pretty much Preordained, and Preordained is the best thing. But the second that there's another playable card that incidentally scries, it just for free levels up the Council's Deliberations as well. And so I'm thinking about it like the same way that you think about Snapcaster, right? Like the second that Snapcaster will only ever get better. I mean, granted, like the power level can wax and wane depending on other things that they print. But if they give you another powerful card to flash back with Snapcaster, Snapcaster just gets more powerful. So the trajectory is that he can only get more powerful with more cards that get printed. And I feel the same way about Council's Deliberation. The more incidental stuff that scries, the better incidentally having Council's Deliberation is going to be. So I'm invested in it as like a long-term card to have in my collection. So.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, let's talk about the One Ring.
The One Ring. I mean, cut to our clip.
Yeah. Here it is.
The One Ring is going to be format overhauling in itself, but like Orcus Bowmasters as another way to punish that on top of it. Like I was talking about how the One Ring is going to overhaul the format in ways that people are not expecting. The card is obscenely broken, but like they recognized how, like, this is the thing. They definitely saw how broken the One Ring actually is by playing it a single time. Literally, anybody who hasn't...
one guy played it one time.
Anybody who hasn't proxied the One Ring once, literally sleeve it up, goldfish it one time, one game, cast it once, and you'll realize how degenerate that card is. It is obscene. I think we can say more or less the same thing now. I think that people have just finally gotten a chance to play with it and recognize its power level. I mean, for the most part, I've seen it show up in Legacy. I feel like it's becoming totally degenerate and modern. But for Legacy purposes, at least, I've seen it primarily in 4-color Uro decks with Halfling, Delighted Halfling, to make your Teferis and your Uros and your One Rings uncounterable, and your Narsets and stuff. And it's really just like a mid-range legendary style, slam stuff deck. But One Ring is so overwhelmingly powerful. If anybody wants to see it, how strong it is in practice, I know Anurag was streaming with 4-color One Ring. I forget when. Fairly recently though, and I imagine that it's already up. It must be up in his VODs, where his opponent had 3 active Staff of the Storytellers, like churning out 3 active Staff of the Storytellers. Plus, he had the Monarch. So his opponent has the Monarch and 3 active Staff.
He's drawing 4 cards a turn, 5 cards a turn,
and could not keep up with a single One Ring.
Yeah.
It was insane. Like, it was an insane match where, and then Anurag was like, wait, okay, let me do the math. They paid 2 for each staff, plus paying for each staff for each card. And so they're like, okay, so they paid 15 mana. They've drawn 6 cards. I've outdrawn them for my 4 mana.
Yeah.
It's just like, the card is very, very, very powerful. And the fact that playing them in multiples just gives you upside because you can turn off the life loss. And usually that's your win condition is just finding the second One Ring, because you play the first one, you fog them, then you untap, you get ancestraled, and then any amount of those cards that are exchanged, and then you draw even more cards, and then the only thing that you need to do after that is not die to the burden counters on your first One Ring. So you just cast the second one, fog them again, and then you don't necessarily need to ever activate it, and you're up half of your deck compared to where your opponent.
It's like the Sphinx's Revelation mirror back during when that was in Standard. It was like when your opponent finally gets the Sphinx's Revelation off, you just scoop. It's done. He's drawn too many cards. You can't come back from that.
Yeah, and I think the thing that flew under the radar for people where they were like, okay, so you pay 4 mana, you draw 3 cards. And I was like, you pay 4 mana, but it does something that a lot of other 4-drops can't do, which is let you take the turn off.
Yeah.
Because you have protection, you can't die. So you can take the turn off. Even if your opponent builds up your board, you will have Ancestraled and have access to all of your mana to then deploy ways to stabilize again. So the play pattern of protection from everything, meaning that you get to take the turn off. It's not like you slam another 4 mana spell and then hope to cross your fingers and hope to untap. You know, like you
don't have to play the Wrath and then get that down, or like get that down and not and like take damage and then Wrath. You know, you can, yeah, exactly.
As long as you're confident that you can resolve the One Ring, tapping out is not a drawback. Like you don't get punished for tapping out the same way that you would with any other type of card that you're trying to stabilize with, because imagine if Jace the Mind Sculptor gave you protection, right? It's just like, well, in that case, it's insane.
What?
You know,
get out of here.
But you know what I'm saying? It's like let's say I had a static one that said when you
crazy.
cast Jace the Mind Sculptor from your hand, when you cast Jace the Mind Sculptor, gain protection from everything until your next turn. It's like, well, if I know 100% that I'm fucking untapping, like, and not dying, even if they remove the One Ring, it will have replaced itself, right? Your board doesn't have protection, so they could theoretically still remove the One Ring, but you're guaranteed to have the One Ring replace itself and confirm that you're going to untap, because the only cards that get around the protection from One Ring, and I've seen people already speculating on, like, are these cards considerations that should be in Legacy now, are Questing Beast, because damage can't be prevented, so it turns off protection, and
Skullcrack? People playing Skullcrack?
Well, I've seen Stomp.
Stop. Okay. Yeah. The Blood Crusher Giant.
Yeah. So because part of the clause for Stomp on Bone Crusher Giant is damage can't be prevented. You can't target them with the Stomp, but you can either target something on their board, your board, or yourself, and then damage can't be prevented, and then potentially get in. Yeah. So because even though your opponent has protection, you can still attack them. They just won't take any damage. But if you can make it so that damage can't be prevented, then protection won't protect them. But those are the only 2 cards that I've seen that are like within the bounds of Legacy playable, that people are like, oh, okay, well, if I can combat the One Ring in this way. But at the same time, every time I look at those kinds of techs, I think, you know, we're reaching into cards that aren't good to beat the cards that are.
But that was the problem with Deathrite Shaman. I kept telling people, like, they're like, oh, well, just, you know, play this or that. It's like, no, this card's that good that, like, it doesn't matter if you play something to answer it, because it's incidental, you know?
There's a certain threshold of power that once you can either do the good thing or try and play the thing that beats the good thing, and oftentimes trying to beat the good thing isn't going to be as good as being the good thing. It's like,
especially if you're not getting a payoff for beating the good thing.
A meta analysis as a whole is like the meta that if you're brewing a deck that you're trying to beat a meta game, you're beating the good stuff. And if you're playing the stuff that beats the good stuff, you may not be playing the good stuff yourself. And that's why those decks never actually make it to tier status and, you know, a metagame viable deck. Like, maybe it's good. Like, that stuff can win a tournament. You can spike a tournament if you call the metagame correctly. But as opposed to something that becomes a mainstay, it's similar in that space. But the One Ring is super powerful. And, you know, will it show up in more homes beyond, like, 4-color Delighted Halfling or, like, Mystic Forge style, you know, whatever nonsense? That is to be seen, but it as proving itself as a Legacy playable card that is, like, very, very strong, like it is a playable mythic, that's determined at this point.
Don't be surprised. Okay, so let's talk about one that I called, and you kind of threw at me some of the best flavor text in Lord of the Rings, by the way. Sauron's Ransom.
Do you want to read the flavor text?
Yeah, let's actually read the flavor text. What does the flavor text say?
So Sauron's Ransom is the updated fact or fiction. It's 1 black, blue, so it's a 3-mana instant. The first off, the ring tempts you. We'll get into the ring tempts you because I've been playing with a I've been testing that mechanic in Legacy, and it's been pretty good so far. But it's a fact or fiction. So your opponent gets to look at the top 4 cards of your library, and they split them into 2 piles, 1 face down pile and 1 face up pile, and then you get to choose which pile you want. So there's some differences between fact or fiction. It's 3 mana instead of 4. They look at 4 cards instead of 5. They don't turn both cards face up, both piles face up, so you don't have perfect information. But you are the one who ultimately gets to choose, which is why it's a very powerful effect. And it showed up as a 2-of in a top 8 Death Shadow list, and it's been showing up sporadically in other Death Shadow lists as well. I haven't seen it outside of Death Shadow so far, but it's been showing up as a 2-of in that list.
So let's read the flavor text real fast. We can assume that he here is actually referring to fact or fiction. He was dear to you, I see, and now he shall endure the slow torment of years.
Wow.
Yo, ripped to a real one though.
See, if and my editor mind wants to simplify all that down to this flavor text. Power creep.
Yep, power creep. Ripped to a real one, fact or fiction. You were in there for a minute. But yeah, no, I mean, dude, it's wild that like this 3 mana, basically it's a 3 mana draw 2 at its worst, plus the ring tempts you. And I think that the plus ring tempts you, and the fact that like it's a blind choose, is enough to just make this just playable. Do I think it's a 4-of card? I don't think so yet, but I think as people see how good this card is and as results come in, people are going to be experimenting more and more about being like, this is the cornerstone of the draw engine in my deck. So if you're not playing the like Council Deliberation preordained situation, this is, I think, where people might be headed. Specifically in Death Shadow, I think that works out well because you don't want to clutter your deck with too much air. You do want ways to lose life. You want threats. You know, you want to get to the cards that get you to the end of the game.
I think there's some amount of nuance to this card. I ordered some already. I had pre-ordered them when I knew that when we had talked about it.
Like,
but also it was like very clear to me that like a 3 mana fact or fiction is good because at the baseline it's a 3 mana instant speed draw 2 that gives you the ring tempts you, which is a meaningful mechanic in some capacity, but also just having played with enough fact or fiction in my life and understanding how powerful that is in a deck that is trying to be reactive and find the right pieces when it needs it. The difference between face-up piles and face-down piles is meaningful, but if you are playing a deck that is looking to do a specific thing, so in Death Shadow, if you need threats or answers, and then in Control, depending on the kind of answers that you need, you can look at the face-up pile, and if you cast the Sauron's Ransom at a time where you're like, I need to find this type of effect to solve the problem that I'm currently facing, if it's not in the face-up cards, you could just take the face-down cards. Yeah. It's very rare that your opponent's ever going to do anything other than a 2-2 split, right? Like maybe there's some amount of game where they know that you're looking for one particular thing, and the top 4 cards of your deck don't deliver on that thing, and so they give you 3 face-up cards and 1 face-down card, and you know that the 3 face-up cards are not in the position that you need them, and so unless you already have the answer in your hand, in which case you'll just take the 3 for 1. You would just go for the face down card. But in that position, it's not even like it was all that damaging because you were looking for a specific thing, and that's like a ponder missing, right? Yeah. It's like I need my card advantage or my card selection spell to find me the thing that I need. And if it misses, it misses. But like in the positions where you already have the thing you need, and it's clear to you, both you and your opponent, that the thing you need is the thing, and then you flip over the cards and they're like, okay, I'm gonna try and game them, and you just 3 for 1 and then kill their shit anyway. It's like that's really, really powerful.
What about so I have a scenario where you might do something a little weird. What about a situation where I'm playing against you and I know you need a board wipe, right? And I look at the cards and what do you know? There are the 2 of the board wipe you need, right? And some other cards. There is a chance that like you're gonna like I could do 2 and 1, right? I know you're gonna take the board wipes, right?
It would be a 2-2. It's 4 cards.
Sorry, 2. I could do 2 in 1 pile. Yeah. Is what I meant.
Oh yeah.
And I know you're gonna find the board wipe, right? Like if you're looking for it, you're gonna pick the pile that either has the card you need or don't pick the pile that doesn't have the card you need, right? But I could go, well, you're going to get it anyhow. You might as well only get 1 card, right? And if I show you the board wipe and 3 other cards, but I know you need the board wipe, at least you only get 1 card?
Right. In which case, your selection piece, like, yes, that's a way to do it. If it's very clear that there's one specific thing needed, it's good to limit the amount of raw cards that your opponent will get, even if they do find the answer. But in that position, as the Sauron Ransom player, it's like, okay, well, it not only found me what I need, but some of the stuff that they dumped to your graveyard on the other thing might also have incidental value as well. Because like it goes to your, like, correct me if I'm wrong, please.
It goes to your
don't tell me
graveyard.
that it goes to your graveyard.
Yes.
So like that is a valuable place for cards to go.
That's where we like to have stuff.
So it's not like there can be additional incidental advantage in it. And there's something to be said about Ring Tempts You not being totally meaningless. I've played recently. I've been testing Sam Stouthearted, Samwise the Stouthearted. It's the flash 2/1 Sam that when it ETBs, you pick back a permanent that left the battlefield this turn, and then the Ring Tempts You. And that card has been pretty good in like my style of deck of like at a baseline, you can go on your turn 2, you have land fetch up, go. And then somewhere on your turn or end step, I can just crack the fetch, flash in Sam, pick up the fetch, and I have now first step in the Ring Tempts You, and I've recouped my fetch, and it's just like a nice way to like ensure that I hit my land drops through development. And then the ring feels very similar to what Stoneforge Mystic would do of like picking you up in equipment, except it doesn't take space in your deck. Now, what I've learned though is that there are 3 rooms that matter in the ring, like 3 levels of the Ring Tempts You that matter, and 1 that's more or less insignificant. So for those who haven't tried it yet, the first stage, which just gives your effectively it gives your creature, your ring bearer, skulk, so they can't be blocked by creatures with greater power, and it makes that creature legendary. Now that's meaningful if you're on a board with a planeswalker or something and you need to get in and chip at the planeswalker. Like if they have something protecting their planeswalker, you can get underneath it. The second part of it though is the legendary status that your ring bearer acquires means that you can start Caracasing or picking up other, like me specifically, I picked up my Snapcaster with I picked up my Snapcaster with a Caracas multiple times, and it was very powerful. Like it is as good as it sounds. And so like incidentally, the Ring Tempts You, like let's say, like it may not do anything over a course of a game in a control deck playing Sauron's Ransom, but I could easily see an Esper control deck that's like, okay, I'm going to play some amount of Snapcasters and some amount of Sauron's Ransom, and if I have a Snapcaster on the table and I have Caracas, I can Sauron's Ransom, find a bunch of stuff, make my Snapcaster legendary, pick it back up, continue that chain of card advantage. Like that's not an invaluable sequence, considering that Caracas also has a lot of defensive targets. Like you can bounce an opponent's Emery, or bounce their opponent's Minsk, or bounce their Uro. Like it bounce their Grizzlebrand as a way that they don't recoup life after they've hit it. I mean, you're going to be clawing back in that situation, but it's still nice to be able to remove it from the table and have to make them go off again. You know, like it is a valuable set of cards that the Ring Tempts You already incentivizes you to play anyway. Now, the other rooms that are powerful in the Ring Tempts You is the looting ability. Obviously, that's the second stage of the Ring Tempts You, so it has to tempt you twice. Once your ring bearer is a looter, looting is good, right? Card selection is good. It's forever going to be good. There's never going to be a time where you're not going to want to be able to draw a card and improve your hand in some capacity. The third room is the one that feels the most anemic to me in the testing that I've done. The third room says whenever the ring bearer is blocked, your opponent sacrifices that creature at the end of combat. Now, if they're in a position where your smaller ring bearer is trading with their card and they are then sacrificing it, they are so far behind because they're blocking it because they're otherwise dead. And so it doesn't matter.
The thing is that they probably can't block it with something big because it's got skulk.
Right. It's already difficult to block, and then if they do block it, and the creature, either the creature would have died anyway, or they would have died and therefore need to block. And so all of us, like, unless you're playing some sort of trick that compels them to block in some way, that room is more or less empty. But then the fourth room is very good. The tacking on a lava spike when they hit every time. So in the testing that I've done with Sam the Stouthearted, the difference between you chunking for 2 and chunking for 5 is significant. Big difference.
Well, that's perfect thing. That's where watching you on 90s MTG, you had like a couple of turns where you were like running in with 2 Snapcasters. It like 4 damage felt great and all, but like when your opponent was at 20, like 7 damage would have felt real, you know?
That's where I had that sort of revelation that that Sam the Stouthearted or the Ring Tempts You with cards that just granted to you incidentally on top of an effect that you already want is very similar to how Stoneforge Mystic just picks up a card out of your deck. The ring feels like an equipment. The thing is that it feels like the payoff is the best rooms are 1, 2, and 4. The third room is sort of meaningless. And so I felt that the times where the Ring Tempts You was actually overwhelmingly powerful against my opponents was when I got to the full power, the full powered ring. That's when I was like, oh, I effectively have unblockable chunk you for 5 every turn, and it just locks in a clock. because they can't get rid of the ring because it's another uninteractable mechanic that they can't touch. So, but it's not like they can strip it from you the way that somebody could take the initiative, you know, or take the monarch. They can't take your ring.
Have it. Yeah,
exactly. So once you've loaded up the ring, then every time, then either your ring bearer is already a very good threat because it's a theoretically unblockable looting haymaker, or the next time you have a threat and tempt again, you have now suited up your creature. Like, you effectively equip for free when you, like, if you think about the ring tempts you effect, think about it as paying for an equip cost. And that's, it's been very good. It's been very good. But I would say that if you lean into that space, you really want to lean into having enough ring tempts you, like a surplus of ring tempts you in order to maximize the full ring. And so Sauron tempting you, my first place that I want to go into it is Esper, because you want Caracas. So if I already want that, so now I'm thinking, okay, maybe there is a control deck that is leveraging Sam and Sauron's Ransom as ways to tempt the ring with like Snapcaster Mages and like maybe other ETB effects. Hey, looking at you, Arcus Bowmasters, like you have this very flash eccentric instant speed sort of Esper deck that can get a lot of incidental value and level up these like little 2-mana dorky beaters into like legitimate threats. And you just don't have to play like your Stoneforge Mystic package. So that's a space that I'd keep an eye on. It's a space that I'm going to be exploring a lot more once I actually have the cards in my hand. But I think that that's a space that so far is underexplored.
Yeah. All right. Well, another one that we called that is seeing play in main decks. Cast into the Fire.
Cast into the Fire. Good incidental moto spell, and if the One Ring is going to be as powerful as we think it is, then having the exile clause. But you know, one of the best decks is Acast and Blue Painter, and having a way to exile artifacts is good. With between Emery and Goblins recurring, it's pretty much exactly what we thought it was. I don't think that was a surprise. I feel like everybody thought that.
Hello, Conjure Complete, indestructible artifact.
I just mean that like
nobody knows is indestructible because you're just like, I guess I just lost that card.
Yeah, there's too many words of text on it. I lost to Cauldron recently because I forgot that it has First Strike. Yeah, I forget who that was against, but I think it was at the SCG Baltimore.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were like, okay, first. I think I blocked it with a Triumph, thinking that I would trade, gain the life, and then be at a good board position because I blanked the combat and then I was Miracle again. And the exact opposite happened where they were like, okay, so First Strike. And I was like,
it gets removed from the game.
What doesn't it have? What does it have?
Also removes your Catherine from the game.
So then First Strike, it'll die, so the trigger will go on the stack. The exile clause happens if a creature doesn't die. Okay. But that was irrelevant anyway, because like, okay, I didn't gain the life like I thought I was,
and now you're dead.
But then I had to pick up the Cauldron, and then I had to turn the pages in its text box to like make sure that I understood everything that it said. Anyway, Cast in the Fire, it has shown up and has done exactly what we thought it was. I don't think that was particularly different from what anybody else in the community thought when they saw the card. They knew what it was going to do. It has proceeded to do that in the role that we expected it to be in, and it's doing it well. So there you go.
To paraphrase what I said in the video, is having this in your deck, especially in your 75, makes your deck more well prepared against every other deck, because then you don't have to put slots in your deck to do both of these things, right? You already have a slot that does both these things in one card instead of doing it with two cards.
The other piece of value too is it is a card that if you're expecting a metagame to be flush with like Grixis, Orcish Bowmasters, Acast as a top deck, or Blue Painter as a top deck, or Death Shadow with Bowmasters as a top deck, any of these other things, like Cast in the Fire is uniquely very good against all that stuff because A, it's good against all the artifacts. Obviously, it says exile target artifact on it, but also it can clean up a Bowmasters by itself.
I have a question. This is I'm just pondering this off the top of my head here. Let's say you have open mana and you brainstorm, and your opponent snaps in a Bowmaster, right? What happens if the Bowmaster comes into play, makes an Orc, right? We put the next trigger on the stack. Right, so he points another damage at you, goes to put a +1 counter on the army, then you cast into the Fire, smashing the Bowmaster and the 1/1 with a counter coming towards it.
Yeah.
Right. Then he only has a 2/2 work. Right.
You could do it if you are in that position. You should just
not cast
before the brainstorm resolves. like if you cast Brainstorm and you have mana and you're holding up Cast into the Fire as well, and they flash in Bowmaster, before the Brainstorm resolves, you should just cast into the fire both their guys, because the ETB trigger will hit.
Obviously,
the ETB trigger will happen.
Should do.
They'll point to damage, make the orc hit both of them, then Brainstorm resolves, and they don't get anything.
I guess what I'm asking is if you can somehow respond to killing the orc with the counter in the stack, right? He's obviously still going to get another orc.
So the way that so you would have Bowmaster with ETB, you'd have to let the ETB trigger resolve, right? So because the way that Bowmaster works is it deals the damage, then you amass one. So they have to actually resolve that in order for the amassed army to show up.
Sure.
Then if but because the Bowmaster trigger is now falling off the stack, we both have to, a round of priority to agree that Brainstorm is going to resolve. So before Brainstorm resolves, you're just like, okay, I'll cast into the fire the Bowmaster and the Orc army. They're gone because you split the damage. You pointed one at each of them, and then you just resolve the Brainstorm, and the Bowmaster isn't there anymore.
I don't even know what I'm thinking there. I retract my dumb question.
I don't think it's dumb. I think you just overthought yourself.
Yeah,
I thought you thought there was like a weird timing window, and
I went way too far down the rabbit hole for that one. Or you can just kill the Orcish Bowmasters.
If there wasn't a trigger happening from the Bowmaster's ETB, and therefore there wasn't a window to kill it in response, but there always would be because you can always respond to the Brainstorm after they. Yeah.
All right, the final card that is seeing play is fourth eorlingas.
So this is the red-white X. You create X red human knight tokens that are 2/2s with trample and haste, and whenever a creature deals combat damage this turn, you become the monarch, right? That's more or less what it reads. Okay. Some interesting things about this card that when I first saw it was spoiled. Okay, it's the cheapest way that we've ever been able to get monarch ever. And it showed up in like Boros Initiative in its first week. Literally at SCG Baltimore, I played against it. My Boros Initiative opponent cast it against me. I've been seeing it show up in like 4-color control and some other control lists. I've seen it show up in Jeskai Delver because if you go turn 1 threat, turn 2 X0 Force Eorlingas and attack, you become the monarch. So it is a 2-mana way to become the monarch. Which is
big in Delver. If you can just draw an extra card every turn.
Yeah, because the way that you become the monarch is not tied to the knights hitting; it's tied to a creature hitting, which is different. So it's the cheapest version of monarch we've ever seen, like playable. I think the previous cheapest way was like a 3-mana enchantment or something that like taps down a creature, and then the only other one was like Palace Jailer saw some play, maybe Queen Marquesa, but those are 4-drops. So there's a 2-drop that can give you the monarch. So I've seen it in Boros Initiative. I've seen it now in Jeskai Delver as ways to get cheap card advantage, and I've seen it show up in 4-color control. Now, a couple of things. I'm gonna quote Anurag, who messaged me, said, "Phil confirming that 4th Eorlingas is the Fire Entreat. Fire Design Entreat the Angels is what he is pitching to me." Now, I'm going to be testing 4th Eorlingas. I haven't personally tested it in Miracles myself yet. I've seen it show up in 4-color control, and all of the people that have played it so far have been impressed. They say it's very good, and it's done a lot of very powerful things for them. Particularly because it solves the problem in that you having hasty threats means that you can chunk down a static walker. So you can hit a Teferi or hit a Narset without having to give the turn cycle back, in which case they continue to stabilize. You can just get rid of it immediately. And then in those matchups, getting the monarch, if the board is going to be more or less empty, is pretty powerful. Now, here's one thing that I didn't think about when the card was spoiled and when I was talking about it with people, that it might be more powerful than I thought for control decks. Now, I'm so tainted by initiative that I thought the second that for a control deck, any piece of cardboard that introduces a mechanic that you cannot interact with, if it introduces the initiative, I don't want it in my deck, right? If it introduces the monarch, I'm thinking I don't want it in my deck. The second that my opponent takes it, if I can't remove it without going through combat, which means that I would have to have a creature already on board, or they're going to get an overwhelming advantage by the time that I do, that I can even contest over it. It's like, those are nightmare scenarios for a control list. I just don't want that anywhere near me. Get that shit away from me.
You're basically giving your opponent a planeswalker. You don't want that.
So when people were like, Phil, what do you think about Aragorn, King of Gondor, which is a lifelink vigilance ETB, become the monarch? They were like, is this just a condensed Batterskull that gives you the monarch? Well, it seems pretty good. It's a 4/4/4. So it's literally Batterskull's text plus gives you the monarch. And then people were like, hey, fourth eorlingas, it gives you the monarch and also like makes you a bunch of tokens. It's like kind of close, right? And I was like, get the monarch shit away from me. Get these uninteractive, emblem-based, nonsensical mechanics in 1v1 the fuck out of here. I want nothing to do with them. And then I was thinking, and as I thought more about Force eorlingas, it says whenever the creature does combat damage, you could just cast it for however big X is, make a bunch of 2/2s. If you attack down their planeswalker, you don't get the monarch. You have to deal combat damage to a player. If you don't want to introduce the monarch, let's say you're not in a position where you're like the board is not stable and I don't want to introduce the monarch to the game, you don't have to. Yeah. I didn't think that far. I didn't think when it was first spoiled, I was so tainted, I was so biased. I was like, I don't want any of this. I want nothing to do with this. That I was like, oh wait a minute, you can just make it an X, it's what's that blue-white battle that we discussed in the spoiler for March of the Machines? It's the blue-white battle that makes X knights with vigilance. It is blue-white. It's a battle that's just blue-white X, make 2/2 vigilant knights. And we were like, the rate on it is way worse than Entreat. I'm just going to play Entreat. I can't Mystic Sanctuary it back. It's like, what am I going to do with this? It's just way worse. But the difference of haste in particular, solving the problem of attacking down opposing walkers in a control battle, is super meaningful. And the fact that that doesn't necessarily turn on the monarch if you don't want it is where I'm like, okay, now I'm interested in testing this card.
Not to mention, there's just going to be times where you quote unquote miracle this and kill your opponent.
Yeah, if you could just be like, okay, tap 6 mana, make 8 power, attack you, you're dead now. Like that's a totally reasonable thing that could happen, right?
Yeah.
But like in the spots where you're like, okay, you have cast a Teferi. If I was on the play, hit my 4th land drop, cast Force eorlingas. If it resolves, I get to take either attack down your Teferi to the point where it's not going to be able to bounce either of my tokens, and now you're gonna have to either spend a bunch of removal spells for fighting over my board, or if you you minus the Teferi and drew a card, then I can make 2/2s, attack down the Teferi and attack you, and then recoup the card that I lost because now I'm the monarch. And if you don't have a creature on board, then you're not taking the monarch back, so it represents another card next turn. And so now I'm plus cards against your Teferi line. Even though I was on the play, even on the draw in that scenario, you can just make a 2/2 and attack down the Teferi if they minus. And so they're going to have to think more strategically about how they're using their Teferi. And then similarly, against an opposing Narset, if they minus the Narset and you're in the first scenario where you're on the play, you can just attack down the Narset. And if you're on the second scenario, you can attack the Narset down to 1 so they can't get the second card.
Yeah.
And now they have to deal with the Knight.
I think one of the really kind of great things about this set in particular is it's changing a lot of the heuristics for how we like autopilot our games, right? Like, obviously you don't just jam a brainstorm anymore, right? Like, can't do that anymore. And like, I think a lot of the people who play Teferi and Narset are going to have to think about whether or not they want to go down to 1 on those, or if incidental point of damage from a Bowmasters or 4th eorlingas, several other cards is going to be enough to not give them the advantage they want, because the true advantage in those cards is the uninteractability that they offer your opponent.
Yeah, the static prison pieces are really where they are the most damaging, but then the fact that they go up cards means that even when you deal with them, you're so far behind. But now there's a couple of these cards that get to interact in meaningful ways where, like, Bowmasters produces 2 bodies or pings, so like you can either check their walkers or put them in a bad position. Like if they play a Narset and minus it down to 3 with the minus ability on the stack before they can find a removal spell, unless they're already tapped out and it's turn 3, you can flash in the Bowmasters, ping it, and now you have 2 power on the table to take it down. Pretty good. Similar with a Teferi, if they minus it, Bowmasters comes in, pings it. Force eorlingas can attack it down. These cards, while being very good in their own right, are also very good against a lot of the stuff that made games pretty much uninteractive and sort of shut off a lot of what you could have been doing. I have to test more with fourth eorlingas. Am I pronouncing it right? Eorlingas?
4th eorlingas. Eorlingas.
So I'm going to test with it and I'll report back. So far, everybody else in like blue-white X realm has told me that it's very, very good. I am convinced by what they have told me so far and watching them play it that the card is good. I'll tell you how it goes in my actual testing when I have the cards in my hand. I was extremely cold on it before.
Are making chatter about it,
Yeah, I was cold on it before for the wrong reasons, and I've sort of opened my mind a little bit to it potentially just being a very good role player. It's gonna be really hard for me to give up my angels, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right, so we've got one last card that has not seen play yet that I think is going to see play, and it's just a matter of time. People just haven't figured out a spot to put it in yet, and that is Flame of Anor.
Yeah, Flame of Anor is the modal spell that lets you choose 2 options if you control a wizard. So you can either draw 2 cards, deal 5 to a creature, or destroy an artifact. Right now, it hasn't really seen play because there's been other spots being contested for. I mean, if you're playing the 3 drops, it's probably the 3 drops that you're moving into with Delighted Halfling, right? That you're curving into on those. Sauron's Ransom has shown up, but that's because it was fortunately in the colors that a deck was already looking for. But Sauron's Ransom also doesn't ask anything else of you. I mean, you can leverage the Ring Tempts You if there's a way to do it, but otherwise that's flavor text. Yeah. You're looking for the Factor Fiction. But Flame of Anor, while being good in that at a baseline, it's a modal spell, which is good, but it's also a 3-minute an instant speed draw 2. It's a 3-minute instant speed divination, which is not nothing. It's a good baseline. But in order for it to be, actually powerful, it's competing in the same space as like Archmage's Charm. And if you're in that sort of space, they're both 3-minute draw 2s, but Archmage's Charm interacts in different ways that might be more meaningful, like it being a counter spell as opposed to a removal spell. The being able to steal a CMC of 1 or less means that you can take an opponent's creature as opposed to removing it. You can take an opponent's Shadow Spear or whatever instead of destroying it. So there's some similarity there. I mean, there's a difference of Chalice, but you may not care about the Chalice at that time. So I think the real way to leverage this card is that you need to have the wizard. And right now, the only playable wizard in that space that anybody's really thought about is Snapcaster Mage. There isn't really any other one. I mean, Bowmasters has made its way into Delver, so even if you have the unflipped Delver, you're not going to be looking to this 3-drop. That's just not the space that Delver wants to be in. So right now, I think the limiting factor for this card is playable wizards. There
will be more. We know there will be more.
There's going to be more. Yeah,
I thought there would be many more in this set. Honestly.
I think that that's true. There isn't any playable wizards really in this set. There's a lot of cards that I thought would have been wizards, but are nobles instead. Yes. Stuff like that.
The Witch King of Angmar is obviously a king, not a witch.
Yeah. I have ordered a set of Flame of Anors. I'm convinced that it will be a reasonable card to have in your collection. It's super cheap, also it's like $1 or something. Yeah. But once there is I think the threshold is there has to be wizards that you would play even if you didn't have Flame of Anor in your deck.
Correct.
It's not going to be good enough if you have to reach for something you otherwise wouldn't play.
What do you think if St. Catherine was a wizard? Would you really think about this?
I would test it for sure. Yeah. One thing I'm just going to check really quick about card type.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Okay, so I was checking if Fairy Mastermind was a fairy wizard. It's not.
No, he's a rogue. He's a rogue.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's some space in that. There is. I was thinking, maybe Flame of Anor is your way to move into red for fairies, and then
the big one would have been years ago. We used to play Vendilion Click, but we just don't play Vendilion Click anymore, and that's a wizard.
Vendilion Click's time has long passed.
There used to be some wizards that we played, but I think even Snapcaster his popularity is waning some.
Well, I think Snapcaster's still good. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's bad by any stretch of imagination. It's just not as popular as it once was.
Yeah. There's a lot more powerful things to do, and a lot of the space that it was in before as additional removable spells or whatever have been covered by the fact that there are more good removal spells. Yeah. So the addition, the copies 5 through whatever that Snapcaster played a long time ago have just been covered by now. It can just be the spells 5 through whatever that you actually wanted. Yeah. But I think right now the only playable wizard really in the deck that would want Flame of Anor is Snapcaster, and that's the limiting factor. Once that changes, Flame of Anor will see more play in the future. I think that's more of a long-term spec. It's dependent on them printing
Yeah.
We're going back to Wilds of Eldraine. Like, there's going to be knights and wizards, and I'm sure we'll probably see a playable wizard in there that we'll get to experiment with. But until then, it'll probably Flame of Anor will sit in your collection, but it's worth having in your collection, I'd say.
I think that's the set I'm the most excited about. Like the next plane that they travel to that they've talked about is going back to Eldraine, because that seems like the most fun. Like in my realm of like what I like fantasy to be is like the King Arthur style fantasy, Shakespearean fantasy. To me is a blast. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, there you have it. There's 5 cards that you should own, and a 6 that you might as well pick up.
Yeah, those are cards that I have pre-ordered copies of all of them, I believe. Let me double check that I am not lying to people. I'm sorry, I have not picked up One Rings myself yet. They're a little too expensive for my blood with all of the other cards that I want to test. All of the other cards that I want to test, I'm prioritizing until, you know, One Ring settles down a little bit from like the modern PT and stuff. But yeah, you should all just pick up these cards. They're all super cheap outside of the One Ring. And eorlingas is picked up. I think it's more expensive than when I got them.
Now? Yeah.
No. It was $6.
$20.
Now it's like $20. Yeah.
So pick up the precon. Get the precon.
Yeah, exactly.
Sell off the precon to someone who wants to play with the precon.
Also, that stuff might be early hype, right? Like, people recognize that the card is playable in a couple of different shells, so now everybody wants them. So like, there's the flood of like, okay, now we don't want it, and then it'll
currency
level back out.
converter effect.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, like, given the amount of time, like, there might be some amount of trending down for those prices, but they're all playable. So good luck to everyone out there.
All right. Well, that does it for us this week. Have a good one, everybody.